Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali. Iraqi Prime Minister Haider Al Abadi is in the United States this week. He's meeting President Obama in Washington, D.C. for the first time since he took the reins of Iraq 7 months ago. During his visits, he's requested additional aid from the U.S. to help combat the Islamic State rebel group that began taking over major cities and towns in northern Iraq last year. President Obama has responded with $200 million in aid, but that is in addition to the military operations that the U.S. is engaged in on the ground. In the past 6 months, about 3,000 U.S. troops returned to Iraq, apparently to strictly train the Iraqi National Army rather than engage in direct combat. U.S. troops had left Iraq in 2011 as part of a planned withdrawal. Prime Minister Al Abadi has also apparently raised concerns about the role of Iran, with whom it shares a border, about Iranian Shia forces playing a lead role in the frontline battles against the Islamic State. President Obama warned Iran, with whom it is currently engaged in productive nuclear talks, to, quote, respect Iraqi sovereignty. There have been major battles to retake the city of Mosul from ISIS. And just this week, troubling reports are emerging of the key city of Ramadi possibly falling into the hands of ISIS. My guest is Nabil Al-Tikriti. He's an associate professor of history at the University of Mary Washington in Virginia. Hi, Nabil.
Hello.
Well, thanks for joining us. Now, Haider Al Abadi has been in power for about 7 months now after his predecessor, Nouri al-Maliki, was essentially pushed out for marginalizing Sunni communities, among other things. How do you assess Abadi's leadership? Or should we simply see him as a puppet of the U.S., or does he actually have independence?
I wouldn't rate him so far as behaving like a puppet of the U.S., not at all. He seems to be stuck in a very difficult place, just like his predecessor al-Maliki was, and he's trying to weave a very delicate path. The big negative that I've heard about his administration was when he first came into power, he appointed his cabinet, and one of the key cabinet positions, one of the key portfolios, was the Ministry of Interior. And the person that he appointed to the Minister of Interior portfolio was one of the former heads of the Badr Corps, which is controversial within Iraqi politics because it's considered to be quite sectarian in the modern history of the last 30 years of Iraq. Aside from that appointment, and maybe a couple of others that I've also heard about, his performance cannot be said to be as sectarian as Maliki's had been. So on the whole, it's a bit of an improvement is the evaluation that I hear the most.
Now, what do you make of the $200 million that the United States has pledged to Iraq? It's supposedly going to be humanitarian aid. President Obama said, quote, there are individual families and children who have suffered as a result of the ISIS conflict. He's implying, I think, that they are going to be families, and internally displaced refugees might be the beneficiaries of this aid?
I think that is a good signal. However, I would point out that $200 million strikes me as the normal amount of money that would be necessary as part of a general humanitarian assistance for the region in general. And by the region, I'm defining it as just Iraq within the region, because the UN constantly is putting out humanitarian donor appeals, and the amounts that total up come out to something like several $100 million, and the amount that the U.S. would be expected to contribute is about that amount. I mean, I don't have the exact figures. And therefore, I think what's interesting about this is the timing of it. In other words, they decided to roll out what strikes me as a very normal ponying up of U.S. funding of an international humanitarian effort on the occasion of Abadi's visit. So it's not actually a major initiative. It's not unusual. It's not a negative thing, but it's not a huge positive either. So it's kind of a meh reaction.
Well, the New York Times yesterday had an interesting piece on the U.S. troops that have returned to Iraq, only to find that the Iraqi National Army is in a state of disarray, rife with corruption, also desertion. It had a very patronizing tone, in my opinion, as if, one were profiling a teacher or a parent who caught a child being naughty and was disappointed in them. I'm wondering how you assess such coverage that just seems to be devoid of the historical context.
I agree with what you're saying about the tone. It was somewhat patronizing, and that does fit the entire sort of history of U.S. intervention and advising in the region. That said, the general observations made by that article I find to be accurate. And it is true that the Iraqi military has devolved into something that's really not very effective at all. And the major reason for that is systemic corruption. And to me, the systemic corruption that is the Iraqi military today was almost an intentional effect of the way that the post 2003 order was set up. So, you know, when they got rid of the old Iraqi military, when they got rid of effectively the state in 2003 and into 2004, and then rebuilt it from scratch, they almost systemically built something that would be inherently corrupted.